The community of Soldotna, Alaska, in south central, what we call the Kenai Peninsula, is going to be celebrating their Progress Days this weekend. And on Friday, we have a homestead community barbecue where a very special individual will be recognized as the first female homesteader in Soldotna. Now, when most of us around here think about homesteading, they might go back to when President Lincoln signed the 1862 Homesteading Act. This enabled over 1.6 million people to stake their claim on federal lands. Perhaps if you are an Alaskan, you recall that homesteading became legal back in 1898. That was when President McKinley signed legislation to extend homesteading to what at that time was still the District of Alaska. It wasn't decades later until we became a state. What most people didn't realize is that, well, the days of the Wild West are certainly over here in the lower 48. The tradition of homesteading is still very, very much alive. And certainly we see that in Alaska. So I'd like to take just a couple minutes this morning to share the story of an Alaskan homesteading icon, Marge Mullen. And again, it is Marge who will be recognized this weekend at Progress Days in Soldotna. In fact, on July 27th, it will be recognized by the mayor of Soldotna, Mayor Anderson. July 27th will be recognized as Marge Mullen Appreciation Day. Marge was born in Chicago in 1920, and according to the Peninsula Clarion, the local newspaper there on the Kenai Peninsula, Marge claims that she remembers seeing an article on Alaskan homesteading in the Chicago Daily News back in 1947. And the idea must have seemed really appealing to her, because after she read that article, she and her husband Frank, who was a pilot during World War II, they bought a small plane and they headed north to plant their roots. So that was quite a trek back in the late 40s to fly in a small aircraft. They landed in Alaska. They walked 65 miles through some pretty tough terrain, and they settled their homestead on Soldotna Creek, making Marge the first woman to live in Soldotna under the Homestead Act. It wasn't too many years after they arrived in Alaska that sadly Marge lost her husband Frank to polio. And it certainly would have been easier at the time for her to just pack up and head back to Chicago. But Marge was a pretty independent, strong-headed woman, and she made that pretty brave choice to remain out on her homestead. And just to kind of paint a picture of what we're talking about back in the early 50s, make sure everybody understands the significance of a decision like that. You can either stay out there in some pretty open and still very wild areas, or go back to Chicago. Homesteading has always been a lifestyle that is based on self-sufficiency. You've got to be able to handle things on your own, and it's a difficult task anywhere. It's difficult, as we saw the initial homesteaders around the lower 48 states, but some additional challenges perhaps in Alaska. Some pretty tough winters that you go through. Temperatures are somewhat unforgiving in the winter months, as we know. Marge faced a cost of living that was 3 to 4 times higher than she knew down in the lower 48. When you're out there, you live every day knowing that wildlife is just right outside your door, and that if something goes wrong, there's not a lot of help. There's no aid in the event of an emergency. So whether it is a bear that has threatened you and your family, or whether it is just the rigors of living on your own with no assistance, no help. It can be a lonely life, but it can be a very life-building experience, and Marge certainly developed that. She learned to hunt on her own, to chop wood, carry water, grow food, to safeguard the health, the warmth, and safety of herself and her 4 children. And trust me when I say that Marge overcame challenges that many of us, even some hardy Alaskans, could not imagine. But she overcame those challenges in an Alaska that was far less modern than the Alaska that our visitors see today. And while Marge is widely known as a pioneer homesteader, she's also known throughout the community of Soldotna for many other contributions. She began the town's first roadside litter pickup program, so she was involved at a lot of different levels. She served as the chair of the local planning commission. She helped establish the Kenai Peninsula Conservation Society. She eventually became its president. In 2010, Marge was honored for her accomplishments when she was rightly inducted into the Alaska Women's Hall of Fame. And Marge's contributions continue today. She is 98. She is revered as Soldotna's unofficial historian. She acts as the chair of the local historical society. You have to figure that she knows everything that went on in the region. She was part of everything that went on in the region. She is really history in the flesh, bringing the early days of Soldotna to life through her teachings and her digital lessons. So again, as I mentioned, the Soldotna City Mayor has proclaimed July 27th as Marge Mullen Appreciation Day. So as the community of Soldotna comes together to celebrate Marge's legacy, I think it's only appropriate that we here in the Senate should come to know a little bit of her history as well and join in the recognition. So I offer my thanks and my best wishes to Marge Mullen as she continues influencing her community and the state of Alaska.